Hi, I'm Kathryn Newitt from Some Products. I write the weekly Power Query blog. The Power Query that I'm using for this video is from Excel, but it works equally well with Power Query from Power BI. My topic is merging matters. I'm going to be transforming data by merging tables and also looking at ways of bringing data in from one table to another. You will need an understanding of Power Query and a strong cup of coffee. Let's go. So this is my first example. As you can see, I've got two tables of data. My first table, I've got a date and a primary salesperson. Now the idea behind this table is, this is the date when Mary takes over as the primary salesperson. So she's responsible for everything up until the 14th of January when John takes over, and then Derek, and then Newitt, and so on. On my second table, we've had some complaints. Now the complaint has described and it's been given a date. So the aim of this exercise is to find out who is responsible for each of these complaints. Now if we look at the top one, it's quite easy. You can see 17th of January. Clearly John would have been in charge because he's in charge from the 15th to the 30th. But the point is how to get this out in a table, because you could have a lot more data than this. And I just want to show how this can be done with merged tables. The first way I'm going to do it is a simple way, but it's not necessarily the quickest way. And then I'll go on to show a slightly more complex way of doing it. So for the first example, I'm just going to start by loading up my tables into Power Query. So I'm going to extract my table, click anywhere on my table, and then from table range, there we go. I'm going to call this table primary salesperson. That's what it's telling me. Okay, I'm going to close and load this to begin with, and I'm going to close and load, just create the connection, because I don't really want to load everything. So always get in the habit of only creating connections if that's what you need. You can always change it later if you find you need to load it. And now I'm just going to repeat the process for my second table from table range. And again, I'm just going to rename this complaints. There we go. So there you go, I've got both of my tables. Now my next step is I'm going to merge my data. Now because I'm going to show a couple of examples with these tables, I'm going to leave alone the original tables. So I'm going to merge queries on the Home tab, but I'm going to merge queries as new. Now this gives me a dialog that comes up. You can see I've already got complaints on here. And now I'm going to link this to primary salesperson. I do still need a link for this example, even though I've only managed to match one row. I'm not going to use a left outer, which is the default join. I'm going to use a full outer because I want everything to come in. So that selects everything from both of my tables, and I click OK. Here we've got a new query called merge 1. This eventually is going to tell me complaint responsibility, so let's give it a better name. Let's give it a name I can spell. So my first step is going to be to expand these tables we've got here in primary salesperson. So if I use the icon next to primary salesperson, I'm not going to use the original column name as prefix because I know all my column names are unique, so I'm good to go. And now we've got complaint date, description, date, and primary salesperson. So my plan is I'm going to create a new column here, which is either going to have complaint date in it, or if that's not available, I'm going to put dates into it. So I'll create a new column which basically holds a single date, which will be the incident date, whether that's the person who's in charge or whether that's the complaint. So what I want to do first is I want to go to the Add Column tab, and then I'm going to create a conditional column. Now sometimes you'll see this, it's grayed out. It's grayed out because at the moment I've got date and primary salesperson still selected from when I expanded the merge. So I can access conditional column. I just need to click on a different column here, and now it's fine. It's quite happy to let me in there. So I'm going to create a new conditional column, and I'm going to call it incident date. And it's going to be based around what's in complaint date. So if complaint date is null, just type null in there, then I want to set this to the sales date. So I select a column, and this is going to be the date associated with the salesperson taking over. So there we go, put date in there. And if it's not null, then I want to make it complaint date. So again, select a column and complaint date. So that's all set up. So this is now going to be my driving column, and I don't need the other date columns. Now I could select them and delete them, but good practice dictates that I should always keep what I need rather than delete other things. So I'm going to select what I want to keep in order. And what I want to see first is I want to see the person. So I'm going to select that first. And then I want to see the description. And then I want to see the date. So I'm going to select to delete the other columns, remove other columns. And there we go, person, description, date. So I've managed to sort them all in one go. The next step is I want to get these dates into order. So I'm going to sort an incident date. I'm just going to sort ascending. And there we go. Now I need to see who was actually in charge on those dates. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my primary salesperson column and I'm going to fill down to see who's in charge for all those dates. So there's a lot of ways I can get to fill down. I can find it on different menus, but I'm going to actually use the right-click menu. So I'm going to go here, fill, and then down. And that's now filled in who's responsible on each of those dates. Next step, I want to get rid of anything which doesn't have a complaint. I'm really not interested in anyone who hasn't received any complaints. Mary. So now I just need to get rid of the rows that don't have any complaints. I can do this by filtering on complaint description. So there we are. We're just going to get rid of any nulls. Click OK. And there we have it. We've got all the data that we were looking for. We've got our primary salesperson, the complaint, and when it happened. And we can see from this that newbie is not doing very well. So now I'm going to go back to those original tables and show a quicker way of achieving the same result. So this time I'm going to look at getting the same result in a slightly different way, hopefully a quicker way. And to do this, I'm going to start off with primary salesperson. I don't want to affect the query I've already done, so I'm just going to take a copy of this. Right, so I've got my primary salesperson copy here. The plan is to turn this into a function which will return the name of the salesperson for any given complaint date. So in order to do this, what I'm going to do is I'm going to generate some lines of code which I'll then parameterize. So to begin with, I need to think about this from the perspective of the complaint, and I would need to know who the primary salesperson was right before my complaint occurred. Before or equal to is important too, because as we know, one of the complaint dates linked exactly to when newbie took over. So we're going to put a filter in here, a date time filter. Now don't worry that it says before and not before or equal to, because once we get into the filter, we have some more options. So here we are, we've got is before, but we can actually drop down and change this, is before or equal to. And then we'll just select a value that gives us a couple of records because it makes it easier to understand. Doesn't really matter what we pick at this point. So we picked a value, that's given us 3 records, and that helps me to decide what the next step would be. Now, I could have more than one salesperson return, and what I need to know is the salesperson that was in charge right before the complaint happened. So in order to achieve this, I need to sort these in reverse order, so sort descending. So in this case, Derek would have been the person in charge right before it happened. So I would only want Derek. I would just need to select the top row. So if we go to the Home tab, keep rows, and we're just going to keep the top row. So there we go, selected top row. And now all we want our function to return is the name Derek. We don't want anything else. So we're going to drill down. And now we've got a single name as the result of our query, which is why the query now looks like text. Next step is to turn this into a function that receives the complaint date. Now to do this, I need to go into the advanced editor. So on the Home tab, Advanced Editor, this is the code I've got so far. Here's my filtered rows. This is the key piece of data which we're going to need to pass in as a parameter. So the first thing to do is to create my parameter. So I'm going to call it P complaint date. I need to tell Power Query what kind of parameter it is. So it's date time, because if you noticed, all of my dates have been date times. And then I need to tell Power Query that this is a parameter, so I need to pass it in this symbol. And next I need to replace this date time with my parameter. Power Query should help me here. There we go, P complaint date. Excellent. So that's all created and ready to go. That's done. Power Query knew that I wanted to create a function. So I don't need to tell Power Query to convert this to a function. Power Query recognizes that I'm passing a parameter in, parameter is being used, it's a function. I should give it a proper name so that I know it's a function. So the name I'm going to give it is FN salesperson. Next thing I need to do is actually use the function. I'm going to use it in complaints. I don't want to mess with the original query because I'm using that to create the merge query. So I'm just going to create another duplicate here. This is going to have the salesperson in, so let's be optimistic and write complaints with primary salesperson. And now we're going to actually invoke the function. To do this, I'm going to create an extra column. So I'll go to the Add Column tab, invoke custom function. I'm going to call our new column primary salesperson. Going to use the function. And it knows already that I've only got one date column on here, so it's suggested I use that date column. And there we go. Exactly the same results that we had before, but just from within one table. And in case anyone doesn't think that it's exactly the same, we'll just go to complaint responsibility, and we can see we have exactly the same people responsible for the complaints. And now all that's left for me to do is to close and load my data to the worksheet. I'm actually going to just close and load two because I want to initially create connections and then choose which tables I want to actually load to my sheet. So the only ones I want to load are complaint responsibility. So I right click on this, get a load to, load to table, and then decide where I want it, which is not at A22. I think I'll have it up here. And then the same for complaints with primary salesperson, load to, table, and I'll put that here. Okay, so that's it. I've got my two original tables and I've got my two methods of finding a solution. My next example is going to be a look at how I can self-merge a table. So for my next example, I've got another simple table here. I've got some tent sizes in one column, and in column B, which is the problem column, I've got some tent colours and prices, and I want to get all the description into a separate column. Now there's lots of ways I could attempt this, but seeing this is all about merging, I'm actually going to find a solution which involves merging. So my first step is to extract my data. So if I go to the Data tab, from Table Range, and this gives me my query. I'm going to merge it with itself. So I can go to Merge Queries. I'm just going to merge within here. And I have the option of merging with the current table. So I'm going to merge on tent size, since I know this will always be unique on my particular table. Okay, I'm going to use a standard left outer join. And this gives me another column with tables. The reason it's given the title change type is because that's the point I've merged my column with itself. I only want to see the tint, colour and price from this table, so I can expand here. I'm not interested in a tint size, I've already got it, so I just want the tint, colour and price. I don't have many columns, so I don't really need to use a prefix for this. So now I can rename my columns ready for the separation. So I'm going to rename this to tint colour. Just take this off the end. And I'm going to rename this to price. Just double click and just tap price, which is just quick. There we go. So this will be tint colour and this will be price. Now I'm going to start with the tint price column because that's quite easy to sort out. Little trick here. I'm just going to convert it to a whole number. If I go to the Home tab here, I can change this to a whole number, which is fine for my prices, not so good for my description. So now I just need to right click on here and remove errors. And there we go, I've just got the prices in this column now. Now I need to get the tint colours in the other column. Now you can see what's happening here. I've got either the tint colour or I've got exactly the same value that I've got in price. So what I can do is I can actually compare these columns. Because I'm going to need to compare data type text, I actually want to change both of these columns to data type just briefly. I realise that's wrong for price ultimately, but just for my comparison, I'm going to change both of these to data type text. So I might as well just click on them both. So hold Control down, click on this too, and then I'm just going to change the type to text for both of these columns. So now these are both text and I can compare them. I'm going to add a conditional column. It's not available at the moment because I've still got two columns selected, so I'll just select one column for now. And there's conditional column available. I'm going to call my new column, I'm going to call it tint colour. Since I've already got a tint colour at the moment, I'll just call this tint colour new. So if tint colour is the same as, I want a column in here, price, then I don't want anything in this column. Otherwise, I want it to be the same as tint colour. Click OK. And there we have it. My new column has now just got the colours in and none of the prices. I don't need my original tint colour column anymore, so I can just remove this. And now I'm left with tint size, price, and tint colour, which I'll rename to tint colour properly now. Final step is to get rid of the columns with nulls in. So now I'm just going to filter on tint colour and just take out the nulls. And there we have it. We have the table in the required format. So now I just need to tidy up a little bit. If you remember, I left price as a text field, so I'm just going to change that back to whole number. We'll just rename this something more sensible. We'll call it tint, description, and price. Okay, and now we can close and load. I'm going to close and load 2 because I want to decide where I'm going to put my table. So I'll just say close and load 2 for now. And I'm going to actually load it to a table, but I want to decide where. So I want to put it on my existing worksheets. And I think I'll put it next to my table this time. So let's just get rid of this. And we'll put it here. Okay, so there we go. There's my original table and my nice new shiny table. Next time I'm going to look at a slightly more complicated example where we're looking at nested merging. Okay, so for the examples so far, you can't help but notice that the data I've used has been quite a small data set. For this example, I'm going to look at a significantly larger data set. So I've got some charges information here. If I just click in the table and go to the bottom of the page, we can see that there's quite a lot of records here, well over 30,000 records. So this is a significantly bigger chunk of data that I'm dealing with. So I have my charges here. I'll just go back up to the top again. And then I also have some description data. And what I want to do is get this description information here into my charges table. So I'm going to begin like I would for any other example from a flat file. I'm going to load my data into Power Query. So from table range, give it a slightly more useful name. This is my charges table. And then I'm going to just save this. I'm going to close and load too, because I want to just create a connection. I don't want to keep loading this to different sheets for no reason. So I'm going to only create a connection here. And then I'm going to go off into my descriptions where I'm going to do the same thing. Data and table range. And of course, I'm going to call this descriptions. So I have my two queries. For this example, I'm not only going to look at how to connect the data, I'm also going to have a closer look at how we can make it more efficient. So I'm going to start off with just a straightforward merge, just to show the kind of M code that Power Query will generate to perform this function. I'm going to start off in charges. And because I'm going to be reusing my data to do it a number of different ways, I'm going to start off by merging queries as new, so I don't affect my original queries at all. So merge as new. I'm going to be linking to descriptions. And I've got an ID column here, which I can use, which is a unique identifier. I'm going to use a left outer join because I know that everything matches together, because I know my data. And here I've got my charges table. As you can see here, we've got a nested join. I've got my charges, I've got descriptions. We've joined them on ID. It's created a new column called descriptions using a left outer join. And now I just need to expand this and just get my description out of it. I don't need to use original column as prefix. It'll be unique on my new query. So that's it, very simple. So how can we actually make this more efficient? Well, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to go back, get rid of this step for now by deleting it. And I'm going to look at my original code as we looked at before. So I've got my charges, I've got my descriptions, and we've used what here is a nested join. Now, this is not the only type of join available in Power Query. So if I look at the syntax for a nested join, I can see that I've got table 1, which would be the charges, the key, which would be ID, table 2, which would be descriptions, and the key again being ID. Creates a new column name, allows me a particular join. And as you can see here, we've got the details. We're joining the rows of table 1 charges with the rows of table 2 description, etc. There is, however, an alternative to table nested join, and that is table join. And here's table join. So as you can see, we've got table join, and then we've got table 1, which would be charges, key 1, which would be ID, table 2, which would be description, and again ID. No column name specified this time, so we're not creating a new column name. So we're basically, as the description below shows, we're joining the rows of table 1 charges to the rows of table 2 description by looking at the linked value, which will be ID. So this looks very similar, but there's two main differences. The first difference is that we haven't got the column name. The second difference is that after join kind, which will be left outer, we have another optional join algorithm. So what is join algorithm? There's nothing in the help page to tell me anything about it, but there's another way that I can look at this. So if I go back, here's my query so far, my merge query. I'm going to add a step. So I'm going to go into function here. And we're going to add a new step. And this step is going to be shared. What this does, it allows me to see all the functions that are available. There's everything that's going on. These are the ones that are specific to my particular queries. And then we've got everything else. So what is all this? And how can I find the function easily? Well, first of all, I can convert this to a table because at the moment it's clearly just a record. So if I convert this to a table, there's much more I can do with it. So now I can just filter on name. So I can look for table join. So here we are, search table join. And there it is, table join. So we can now click OK. And there we have table join. So now I'm going to click on function. And here we have lots of details about table join. So if I scroll down and look at the options for join algorithm, we can see we've got dynamic, pairwise hash. The one that I'm interested in is sort merge. The reason I'm interested in this is because I'm dealing with flat files, and the way that Power Query works is to store those flat files in memory when it's creating a merge and to sort them prior to linking them together. This will allow me to skip that step. If I know my data's already in the right order, then I can merge without sorting, and this is what sort merge will allow me to do. So sort merge is allowing me to join my tables together without also having to hold them in memory and sort them. So this should speed things up. So what I need to do now is go back to my source and change the way that I'm joining my tables so that I can use this sort merge join algorithm. So a quick way to get rid of my extra steps, if I go to custom one, I can right click on this and I can delete until end. Yes, I definitely want to do that. So now I have just my source step and I've got my nested join. So what I want to do now is I want to change this from a nested join into a table join. Now the syntax is quite similar. So instead of nested join, I can do table join. So I need the dot. Still joining on charges, still joining on descriptions. If you remember, table join doesn't have to have a column. We'll see why in a moment. So we can get rid of this. We still want join kind left outer, but what we also want is we want to add a join algorithm. So comma here. And you can see here we've actually been given the option now, join algorithm. So I'll just click on this and it's brought it in. So let's see what happens when I tick OK. Well, not quite right. And the reason it's gone wrong here is because I have duplicate column names on my table and it's trying to join everything. So I'm just going to create a version of descriptions here that I can use for my join. So I go to descriptions, make a duplicate copy of descriptions here because I don't want to impact my original descriptions. Now we're just going to go into here, and the only thing we need to keep for the purposes of this merge is we need to keep description and ID. So as usual, because we only need to keep description and ID, we should just remove other columns. And then because we're going to have problems with ID not being unique in the other file, I'm just going to rename this description ID. Okay, that's fine like that. Okay, so now I'm just going to rename this descriptions new. And we're going to go back to merge one and use descriptions new instead. So we can put descriptions new in here. If I click OK, there's still another problem because ID needs to change too. So I just need to change ID to description ID. And hopefully that is okay. And there we go. Here's description ID, which we don't need, but it's been included just for our link. And there's the description. So this is quicker than joining with nested join because we're not having to sort this time. We're just immediately joining all the tables together because we know they're already in the right order. This only works if you know your data's in the right order and if you're dealing with flat files. So you can see now why the errors occurred because we don't have an extra step where I expand the table. We simply have the description and the description ID being brought straight in, and we don't need to hold them in memory because we're not having to sort them, so it's a much quicker way of bringing them in. Obviously, it depends how many columns you're dealing with. There'll be some circumstances where this will work very well, other circumstances where it won't, because you can't specify the columns that are being brought in the same way. So it just depends which works better in your scenario. There are other ways of making joins more efficient. If you remember in my first example, I looked at a couple of ways of merging data, and one of those was to use a column. Last time I used a function for that. This time I'm going to use a custom column to pull the data from the descriptions file. So that's my next example. So I'm just going to rename my query before I move on. So we're going to call this charges with description method 1. Okay. The final method I'm going to look at is completely unsuitable for this data. I'm going to be creating a new column and pulling in data from the descriptions table. Now, the descriptions table is extremely long and has very few columns, so it makes no sense to do this. The reason I'm doing it is not because I've gone completely mad, it's because I'm demonstrating two things. Firstly, I'm demonstrating a method you can use to pull in data, which works pretty well if you've got short tables with lots of columns. And also, I'm using a very slow method for this data because I'm going to show how that can be improved, and you can actually see the improvement. So bear with me, and off we go. Now I'm going to get my description from descriptions in a different way by creating a column within charges that pulls out the description that matches. So to do this, because I don't want to affect my merged query that I've just created, I'm going to create a duplicate of charges. So it won't have any impact on my original charges query. And I'm just going to rename this charges new. And on this query, I'm going to add a new custom column. And for this custom column, which I'm going to call description, I'm going to use a function called table select rows. You can see it here, so I'll just take it from the, I have to watch for this, it's giving me an extra table, which we don't need. Table select rows, as soon as I open the brackets, it gives me the syntax. I specify a table, which is going to be descriptions, and I specify a condition. And the condition is going to be that the row on descriptions has the same ID as the row on my current charges line. So the first thing I enter is the table name, descriptions, and then my condition. And the condition I'm going to use is value equals, which if I type right, comes up here. You can see it's prompted me again, so I'll take this. Value equals, again, it's going to tell me what the syntax is. So the first parameter is the value, and the second is the second value, and these are the values being compared. So these two values are going to be equal. So the first value is going to be the ID on descriptions. So descriptions ID. So that's a square bracket. And then the second value is going to be my current ID, so I can just push it in like this. And then I need to close my brackets. No syntax errors, so it'd be fine, yeah? Not quite, but let's see what happens when I click OK. I've got errors. And the reason I've got errors, of course, that will be perfectly clear as soon as I click on the error. Yeah, that's not really helping me, is it? I'm just going to get rid of this extra line I've created here. And I'm going to go and look at the M code. And to do that, I'm going to go to the Home tab and have a look in the Advanced Editor. The first two lines are fine. That's the source, and it's the automated change type step. The problem comes in my added custom step, and the problem is with this word each. I'm trying to use each not only to refer to each row of my charges table, But within that, I'm also referring to each row of my descriptions table, because I've got to go and read the descriptions table and find the row that corresponds to the right ID. I can't do that. Power Query needs to know which thing I'm talking about. So I'm going to take the each statement and I'm going to add to it. I'm going to create one parameter for charges, which I'm going to pass in, and that's my first loop. I've used the wrong bracket there. And then I need to create another loop for descriptions, and it comes when we're comparing the values. So down here, I need to say each description, or each row on the descriptions table, so each descriptions. Each descriptions. Put my parameter in. And now this value equal statement needs to look at the value in my descriptions loop. So that'll be each descriptions. And compare that with the value on my charges loop. So that will be each charges. And now that I'm telling Power Query where to look, it should be able to find the data that I need. So now we have a table and not an error. As usual, what I need to do is I need to go and expand this, and I only want the description. It's taking a while. We've got quite big tables that we're dealing with here. And this is a point to note, because I'm going to go and I'm going to improve this before we end this query. So what it's doing is it's going through all my charges, and then for each of those charges, it's going through the descriptions, and now it's come back perfectly correct. Everything's fine, but I need to make this faster. And there's a way I can do this. Because I'm dealing with flat files, I can use table buffer. Table buffer syntax is quite simple. You're basically reading a table. So you buffer your table in memory and you isolate it from any other changes that are going on while it's evaluating. So I'm going to hold the contents of descriptions in RAM so it's not affected by any changes that are going on whilst the read is taking place. To do this, I need to add a step. I could either do it using the formula bar, but I think it's probably clearer if I use the advanced editor again. So if I go into the advanced editor, I need to buffer descriptions before I do any of my, I need to buffer descriptions before this loop. So I'm going to do it before my added custom step. So in here, I'm going to create a new step, which I'm going to call buffered descriptions. And this is going to equal table buffer. Table buffer. Very simple syntax. It simply wants to know what table I want to buffer. So it's descriptions. You can see descriptions there. We need a comma at the end because we're still in the middle of our code. So I buffered my table. It's not much use doing that unless I'm actually going to refer to my table. So wherever I've got descriptions here, I'm actually going to use buffered descriptions. There we go. So now I'm selecting rows based on buffered descriptions. So let's see if this is any faster. You can see my steps appeared, and now it's being worked out again. And that was significantly faster. So we've got all the data that we're looking for. Whilst table buffers help with this example, you really have to look at the effect on your own individual queries. It could be that it makes it quicker. It could be that it makes it worse. And the reason for this is buffering uses RAM. and the amount of RAM held by Power Query is limited. So if you're exceeding your limits, the RAM has to come from the hard drive, and that would seriously slow your query down. So you should only apply it where you find there's a need for it, rather than adding it all the time. And when you're using it, you need to keep testing and make sure that it's not causing more problems than it's solving. And that brings us to the end of this example in buffering. What I'm going to do now is just close and load my data. Always a good idea to close and load too in the first instance, and then I can select what I want to load. So we're just going to close and load, create the connections. So I'm going to put my queries on a new page. So the queries I want are charges with description method 1, which I'm going to load to a new page. So load to table. I want it on a new worksheet. I don't really want it in the middle of my table here. So that's okay. So we've got charges with description method. It's actually put it a little bit further along than I want, so I'll just move that to the end. There we go. And now we're going to create a table for charges new. So we just go to this, load to, table. I think we'll put this on a new sheet as well, otherwise things will be crowded. It'll create the name again. So there we go. So now I have my charges new sheet where I've got charges with the description, which is exactly the same as charges with description, except I've got the description ID still on there, which obviously I'd have to delete if this was real data. And that's it. That brings me to an end of my examples on merging. And that concludes Merging Matters. I hope this has been useful. Enjoy the rest of the conference.